12.5, 12.6, 12.8, yeah.
Hey guys, Danny Johnson here, and Justin SVT came over, and he bought the AEM Failsafe, the same one that I have on my Cobra, and have really enjoyed for the last while. And what's so good about this one is it measures air-fuel ratio and boost, and depending on what faceplate you put on it, it will be set up however you want to have it configured. So then what you need to do is get the actual software, which you can download straight from online, and then plug the USB port in from the gauge. The gauge actually has a USB port in it, and you'll open up the file here that allows you to see it. So we're in my car now. The reason being is we wanted to open it up and remember how I had mine set up as far as the configuration goes. So this is kind of the standard layout that you can have. So you have PSI at the bottom, and you have AFR on the left hand side of the graph. So as long as you're in vacuum down here, zero boost, all that, as long as your car's down in here, it's not going to trigger it off. So it can be up high here. We don't really care much about that. Once you start getting into boost, that's when we want to be no higher. We don't want to be on this side of the graph, or it will trigger the alarm. Okay, so down here, my car, for example, as soon as I go wide open throttle, I'm down under 11 the whole time. This car's running a little rich, so I will never have it trigger the fail-safe at all. But I do want to know if, like, let's say when my fuel pumps went out or I had a problem and the AFR climbed, then when I'm at 12 PSI, I better not have the car go any leaner than 11.8. So if it came and went up in here into the into the 12, 13, 14 range, that's when the gauge would start flashing at me and let me know. So you can have this conservatively set if you want, so that if your car's tuned at 11.2 or 11.5 and you want to know the instant that it goes any higher than that in the AFR, you can bring each of these lines down a little more, because wherever you set them is where they're going to go. So for example, here at let's just say 20 PSI, because obviously I'm not going to be that high, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it down here. And so if my car was in 20 PSI and I was doing anything over this, let's just say we'll put it right at 11. So if I was doing anything over 11 on the AFR, if it was any leaner than that, it'll trigger it. So the point is, you want to have this set up. You don't want these too low, or it's going to always trigger the gauge. So you want them, but you do want to know if the car ever does go over the this limit. So that's what you're doing, is going through here one by one and changing your limit. Okay, you can go over here and hit reset limit and start all over. You can set auto limits. You can clear the graph. Okay, you can do a test when the car is turned on. And so then up here where it says configuration on the gauge, this is where we're deciding what we want it in. So my faceplate is here in the digital readout in the center. I want it to be air-fuel ratio, okay? And you have different faceplates that you put on for each of these. Okay, on the outer one here, that's going to be showing you on a bar graph, kind of an analog readout. That's where you're going to decide what faceplate you have installed, and mine is the PSI gauge. Okay, so I have PSI on the outside, and then I have the middle reading the AFR, and you can switch those backwards. You can do both as AFR, you can do both as PSI, however you want to set it up. So I did want to show you as well, behind the glove box, this is where you have the vacuum line come in for the gauge. So you just put the Y connector in there, and then you can see the gauge has its own boost, and that's how we're measuring the PSI on the gauge. And then you have all kinds of different face plates, lambda, boost, AFR, whichever you want. And so gauge comes with all those. We even went farther and did a custom one, so it says SVT and matches the rest of the car. And I have a video on that. It's just an overlay, so I'll put the link to that in the description. But anyway, you can configure it however you'd like, and that's kind of fun. And of course you have the USB that's coming, from the back of the gauge as well. And so over here in this range, this is how I have mine set up to be pretty much amber colored up until 2 PSI, and then anything basically that I want to see is green up until I hit 17. Since my car's maxing out at 17 PSI right now, that's where I put my yellow one. It's that way when I hit full throttle, if I see yellow or this amber color, then I know that I'm right exactly where I need to be and I'm at the top range. If I see red, I know I'm in an overboost situation, and then anything in green I know is how the car should be set up. So you just move these back and forth and it will, you know, move this dial up and down. And then if you change it to AFR, this will be a readout. Instead of going all the way up in PSI, it's going to be just in the AFR. And the same thing, you just decide what you want yellow to be, what range you want green to be, and the next orange, and then the red. So anyway, that's the basic way to configure the gauge. It's really simple, and it helps you know that if your car starts to go outside of this AFR range, it's going to flash at you. So anything up in this area, the car's going to flash. Okay, so now we're in my brother's 10th anniversary red Cobra, and he has it set up kind of the same. He wants to have AFR in the middle. He wants PSI as the outer analog. He has his set up a little bit different. He wants to see just all orange until it gets to 10 PSI, and anything over 10 PSI basically is going to be green. So it's nice with this gauge because you could set it up however you want according to what your car is tuned for or what you're looking for. Right now he's a ported Eaton, and he's going to go to a TVS 265. So at this point, this is how he wants his gauge configured. So it's really cool, and you know, you can just come up here into the configuration and just change where you want it to be. So really nice. Also with the failsafe, he went and took it for a test drive, and sure enough, it triggered it. Just so we're coming in here and just changing a few of these parameters. Okay, so you have upper limits, so you want to know if the car's going lean, and then you have lower limits in case it's going too rich. A lot of people just put the lower limits all the way at the bottom because they don't really care how rich it goes. This is how we have it set up then for the 10th anniversary Cobra here. We have all of our lower limits at the bottom because we don't care how rich it runs at this point. It's not going to be too rich. We do care about how lean it goes, and the car's tuned right now a little on the high side, so we're going to go ahead and set this at 12. If the car goes into the 12s for any reason, it's going to alert us. Now it's kind of hard to see on this camera, but we are getting a clear number. And as you can see, it's orange when it's not in boost, and it's green as it's starting to go into boost slightly, just out of vacuum. And we do have an AFR readout right now that you guys can't see, but it's, you know, there you see how the boost went up as soon as he hit the gas. Okay, second gear.
All right, 4,000 RPM. Nope. Yeah, that was up to about 6,000, and it went to 12.6, 12.7.
Yeah, so far too lean there. Okay, so over here there's a download log. We're going to click on that. And so now it's basically saving the last few polls that he did. And there's also an option to delete it. It will self-delete, I think, every 24 hours. So it asks if you want to save to a disk. We'll say no. And so here's where the car was going for basically the last 24 hours. And so you can see all that we're really going to focus on over here is when he was in boost. So over here on the left side, this is just kind of the car idling, sitting around, whatever. And you can see some of these like dropping off as the time's going on. I'm not sure if you can set how long you want to keep it until it self-deletes, or if it just self-deletes. But so what we're looking at here, these were all his AFR versus boost that the car did. So as soon as he got kind of into boost, you can see right here his car was kind of going right along the line that we had set up, and everything here, all these 11s, 12s, this is all kind of under his limit. See, the red limit that we put is the high limit. So you can see all these groupings. This is what the car was doing for all the recent polls that he just did. Now if you want to see what it's doing in the moment, take the car out and pull up the screen, and then you can watch it in live time, because right now he did 3 different polls. We don't really know which poll was which, but you can see that all of these are kind of lining up right underneath that red line, kind of where we want it. Right here, it's a little leaner than we want it to be. So you can see right here, it's telling us that his AFR was 12.1 at 12 PSI. Okay, so here, this was probably a different poll. His AFR was 11.8 at 12 PSI. Okay, so the most that this car made was in the 12 PSI range. Okay, 12.2, let's see. Yeah, 12.2. And his AFR was a little higher than we'd like to see it. So anyway, this is a good tuning tool. And so then you can save this as its own file, and you can come back on it a little bit later. But if nothing else, what I like to do is just hit print screen over here, and you take that screenshot, and then we just go over and open up Microsoft Paint. Beep. And when you Control V or paste, either way, now we have a picture of what his car last did, and then we can just save this file as his 10th anniversary Cobra. But anyway, that's showing you all the yellow is how the car is running and what it's currently doing. And once again, you set your upper limits in the red that you don't want it to go over, and then the lower limits as well. So let's say that he was real particular, and like my Cobra, you're going to see even into the 10 AFR, that mine's tuned really rich. And so if I didn't like that, I could set my lower limit to be into the 10s, you know, and kind of get that range. I want it between these two ranges, and I want the failsafe to go off and tell me if I'm ever too rich or too rich or too lean.
And also, just to show you, here's the AFR from the dyno as you see it as it dips down. So this might be what you also want to follow for the gauge, as far as, you know, what AFR you're running at what boost level, according to how the car's been tuned when you eventually do have it tuned.
Whoa, 12.7, that's not... Oh, there's a cop right there. No, coming up. All right, so here we go. Fourth gear, about 3,000 RPM. Here we go. 12.4, 5, 12.6, 12.8. Yep. That was only to 4,000 RPM too.
Okay, second gear.
All right, 4,000 RPM. Nope. Yeah, that was up to about 6,000, and it went to 12.6, 12.7.
Yeah, so far too lean there. So what we're finding with the failsafe, see, this is a great tool for us, because without this, with no gauges, you'd be running the car however it was tuned. And what we're finding out is it's a little on the lean side. That makes us a little uncomfortable for 91 octane. We're not sure what the timing is. We have some Aeroforce interceptor gauges to read into that, but we don't really care much about the timing because we're not seeing the AFR we want. So it may be tuned conservatively on the timing side that's helping with that, but in the end, properly tuned, we don't want to be at that high of an AFR. If they are that high of an AFR, we want to change our ignition timing. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, that's way too lean. The car has 39-pound injectors, and it's a ported Eaton. So I'm suspecting that maybe it's just running out of injector, and it should never have been tuned with that from the previous owner. He should have got 60-pounders at least. So I'm glad I have the gauge on here. I have not run this car hard. I've owned it for about a year now, and I've done a couple quick little pulls in it, but I've never been hard on it until I had gauges to get it metered, and so I'm going to make sure that this car is safe before I get into it. And I'm looking to do a return fuel system. I already bought 80-pound injectors for it, and that way I can get it retuned with the VMP 2.65 that I already bought, and that way it should have plenty of fuel. So I just wanted to know, what is the car doing right now, and that's way too lean. I don't like that. So So it could be that I have a fuel pump that's dying, you know, because when it was tuned, it showed it was at high 11s air-fuel ratio. So something may have changed with the fuel pumps, and you know, I might have a dying pump or something as well. So
yeah, other than that, the car is running perfectly how it should be. And just as kind of a comparison, mine's the opposite. They're running it too rich. In fact, it pegs 9.9 on my AFR, and what I've found is the person who had tuned it had a strategy to run the car a lot more rich and then increase ignition timing, hoping that the car stays cool from the added fuel, and then push it with more timing. I don't like that strategy either, so at some point I'd like to retune mine. And the tuner of whoever tuned this car may have been somewhat the opposite strategy. They're running it lean and they don't have a lot of ignition timing in it. We'll find that out when we have the Aeroforce interceptor gauges. But as you saw, the gauge is doing what it's supposed to. As soon as we're outside of the range that we set where we're not comfortable, it was flashing at us. And if you do want to get into it, you can go into the computer and wire in one of the wires so that it will actually cut the throttle if you go into that lean position, and that would save the engine if you're not paying attention. Because I'll tell you, a lot of times when you're under full boost and concentrating on a lot of other things, you might not be staring right at the wideband. And so it is good with the failsafe. It has that option if you want it to go ahead and automatically cut the ignition to the car so that you're not going to lean it out. But anyway, other than that, beautiful day out here. We're enjoying a nice drive, beautiful car, you know, 43,000 miles on it. This is identical to my Screaming Yellow Cobra, basically same mileage, and, you know, and all that. So just beautiful time to be driving around. We're really enjoying the day. So yeah, when it was tuned, I was really happy to hear people like the tuning company. It's in California, very good company. And I saw the graph, and it was within range, but when I bought the car, I knew that I was going to have to change some things on it anyway, and so at that point I said I might as well get a bigger blower, might as well do what I want with the car and go return fuel system, because you know, maybe the pumps are having problems and it's time for that. But I don't hear any pinging. I don't hear any. I don't even know really what to listen for with that. I don't hear any unusual noises. Yeah, and that would be low octane. If you're hearing the pinging, that's low octane when you're not driving around much. That's at full boost. That's actually, you probably won't hear it. You'll just lose the piston. Yeah. Lose compression, but yeah. But anyway, I'm looking to change a lot of things in the car anyway, and that was my plan. Yeah, so a short burst like that going into the 12s is, you know, that's not going to hurt it, but you are running the risk of the fuel pre-igniting. You are running the risk of it running hot enough to start to overheat the pistons, form hot spots. So if he had this car and, for example, was out racing somebody and he's doing that all the way through second, third, and fourth gear, running it lean, that's where you're going to start to see engine failures, you know, melting the piston and getting blown by with oil, detonation from the fuel pre-igniting, taking chunks of the piston out. So it's very wise what he did. I was in the same situation when I bought my Cobra. It didn't have a gauge in it, and so before going out and going hard on it and just assuming that, you know, hey, it was tuned, it must be fine, you know, he's taking the proper precautions and getting the proper gauges to monitor it. So I think that's vital, and that's why a lot of people lose engines, is just the ignorance, or just not knowing, you know, what is going on and what you need to be looking at. So as a recap, we really want to see somewhere in the 11.2 to 12 is the maximum range you want to be in for a supercharged car. Now, as we mentioned earlier, depending on how much ignition timing you're running, that can, you know, you can play with those a little bit, but ultimately you want to be around 17 degrees timing. You want to be a max of about 15 to 17 psi, and no lower than, you know, you want to be around the 11.2 to 11.5 range on the AFRs. That's kind of the numbers you should be hitting for a safe tune on 91 octane.
Yeah, you know, I ran it up to about 5,500 RPM. You know, it may be tuned to go richer up towards redline, but still it was too lean for me to stay in it and be happy about it.
I think that was wise. You did the right thing pulling out of it as soon as we saw it flashing. That's what the gauge is designed to do, is to flash at you to warn you, and as we mentioned, or wire it in and have it cut the power, cut the ignition for you, so that you don't lean the car out and cause all the problems of, you know, pre-ignition and running it too lean, melting pistons. And, you know, there's a lot of other things too. You run it lean, you might get away with it, just say you don't have a catastrophic failure. You're overheating a lot of the components in the engine, and, you know, even down to the piston rings and into the cylinder head. You know, you just don't want to be running it that lean and heating it up.
Well, and it's also important to remember, for those who didn't see the videos earlier, the first thing I did when I bought the car was do a compression test, and it came back great. The car's healthy. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I looked at the pistons with borescope. Everything looks pretty good in there. So I don't think the previous owner did a lot of racing with it. He told me he never took it to the drag strip, and he didn't do highway pulls with it against people. So I think that's where the damage would have come, if he was doing long pulls on the freeway with it set up. And like I said, you know, it was tuned more conservative than what I'm seeing on the gauge now. So there could just be a fueling problem. I want to see what fuel pressure I'm running, and that's why I bought the Aeroforce gauges, but they're not installed yet. I've had a little issue with them, and I'm talking to Aeroforce right now about getting them fixed. And anyway, I want to see how much fuel pressure I have. I want to see how much ignition timing. And but at this point, I'm definitely not doing anything more with the car. I'm not going to be running it hard or doing anything more with it. So
yeah. Now, another thing to mention is when these cars are tuned, they usually put the AFR sensor from the dyno on the tailpipe. Okay. By the time the exhaust fumes have worked themselves from basically the manifolds all the way to the tailpipe, it's usually a little more lean than what the would measure if it was where we have it now, 12 inches away from the manifold. So he has a more accurate reading now, and I agree. Seeing that the car is running lean 12 inches away from the manifold might just be leading you on to, you know, we'll have to check. You have a booster pump on this?
it does. It has a Kenny Bell booster pump.
We're going to make sure that the setting on that is all the way 100%.
It's wired. The wires are wired together on the gauge, so it should be full boost.
Okay. And then just a real quick, lean versus rich. You know, what are the problems you have? Well, if you're running too rich, you're basically washing the cylinders out with the fuel, and so all of the oiling that you do have on rings and everything gets...
Sorry, I meant to say that the oil gets washed off, the camera cut out there. But anyway, hopefully this is a good video for you to see. We really like these wide bands. I'll put a link in the description where you can get them. They are expensive, but a lot less expensive than an engine, if you know what I mean. So anyway, just scratching the surface here. We'll do more data logging and other videos. Anyway, fun day, beautiful weather, and we really do like the AEM Failsafe. I think it's a good investment. So if you have any questions, put it in the comments, and we'll do some data logging, some other things for you. So thanks for watching, as always, and stay subscribed.